I've been a deputy sheriff for 14 years, and what happened on November 15th, 2024, still keeps me awake at night. What I witnessed that day changed everything I thought I knew about how deep criminal networks can burrow into ordinary neighborhoods. The call came in at 2:47 a.m. during one of the worst rainstorms we'd had all year. Domestic disturbance, 847 Maple Grove Lane. Female caller, line went dead. Standard protocol for these situations: someone calls for help, then hangs up when the abuser realizes what's happening. My partner Deputy Martinez and I were already soaked from responding to a fender bender an hour earlier. The rain was coming down so hard our wipers could barely keep up, and visibility was maybe 20 feet. Maple Grove was in the newer subdivision, middle-class families, well-maintained lawns, the kind of neighborhood where domestic calls usually involve too much alcohol and hurt feelings. When we pulled up to 847, everything looked normal. Two-story colonial, manicured landscaping, expensive cars in the driveway. The only odd thing was that every light in the house was on at 3 in the morning. That's often a sign of escalation in domestic situations. Victims turn on lights hoping neighbors will notice something's wrong. "You take the front, I'll cover the back," Martinez said, but before we could split up, the front door opened and a woman in her 30s stepped out. She was perfectly dressed despite the hour business attire, full makeup, not a hair out of place. That immediately set off my radar. Domestic violence victims usually look disheveled, scared, maybe showing signs of struggle. "Officers, thank God you're here," she said, her voice steady and calm. "I'm Sarah Chin, and I'm so sorry for the false alarm. I was practicing a presentation for work tomorrow and accidentally hit the emergency button on my phone. I had no idea it would automatically dial 911. Standard procedure requires us to enter the residence and speak with all parties present, but something about her demeanor bothered me. She was too composed, too prepared with her explanation. In 14 years, I'd never seen someone accidentally call 911 from their phone's emergency feature, especially not at 3 a.m. while practicing a presentation. "Ma'am, we still need to come inside and make sure everyone's safe," I explained. "It's department policy for domestic calls." "Of course, absolutely. Please come in out of the rain." The house was immaculate inside. Not just clean, sterile. Like a model home. No personal photos, no lived-in clutter, nothing that suggested actual people lived there. The only sound was the hum of multiple computers running somewhere in the house. "Is there anyone else here with you tonight, ma'am?" Martinez asked, following protocol. "Just my husband David. He's upstairs working. He's a freelance IT consultant, works odd hours, you know how it is." But as she spoke, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. On the kitchen counter were at least 15 different driver's licenses spread out like playing cards. And not just licenses, social security cards, credit cards, passports. All with different names, but I could see enough to tell they all had the same photo, Sarah Chin. "Ma'am," I said carefully, "can you explain what those documents are on your counter?" Her composure cracked for just a second. "Oh, those? David helps people replace lost documents. It's part of his consulting business." That was when we heard footsteps upstairs, but not just one person. Multiple people walking around, muffled voices, the sound of papers shuffling. Sarah had said only her husband was home. "I think we need to speak with your husband and anyone else who's here," I said, my hand instinctively moving toward my radio. "That's not necessary. Really, everything's fine here." But Martinez was already calling for backup, speaking quietly into his shoulder mic. "Unit 47 requesting additional units to 847 Maple Grove Lane. Possible criminal activity in progress." That's when Sarah's mask completely dropped. "You don't understand what you're walking into," she said, and for the first time, she looked genuinely afraid. "This isn't just about fake IDs. These people, they're not going to just surrender." Before I could ask what she meant, we heard a door slam upstairs, then another. Then the sound of multiple people moving quickly through the house. Someone shouted, "Go, go, go!" And suddenly the sterile suburban home erupted into chaos. 3 men rushed down the stairs, But they weren't armed with weapons, they were carrying boxes of documents, hard drives, laptops. This wasn't a violent domestic situation. This was a full-scale identity theft operation, and we just walked into the middle of their shutdown procedure. "Sheriff's Department! Stop where you are!" I shouted, but they pushed past us toward the back door. Martinez grabbed one of them, and documents scattered everywhere: birth certificates, bank statements, credit applications, all with different names but similar handwriting. As I tried to process what I was seeing, Sarah grabbed my arm. "Officer, you need to understand this isn't just local. The people who run this operation, they have connections everywhere. Police departments, DMV offices, Social Security Administration. How do you think we got access to all these official documents?" The implications hit me like a sledgehammer. This wasn't just some criminals making fake IDs in their basement. This was an organized network with inside access to government systems. While Martinez chased suspects out the back door, I found myself in what had to be the command center, a converted dining room with 12 high-end computers, multiple printers, and stacks of blank official documents. But what terrified me most were the files labeled with dates going back 3 years and location codes I recognized. Cities where I knew other deputies, other departments. On the main computer screen was a spreadsheet with hundreds of names, birth dates, and social security numbers. But in the column labeled Source, I saw entries that made my stomach drop. DMB Jackson, PD Database Martinez, County Records Thompson. These weren't just random identity thieves. They had people inside law enforcement agencies feeding them personal information. Sarah had followed me into the room. "Now you see why I was afraid," she whispered. "Officer, my real name is Jennifer Walsh. I've been working undercover for the FBI for 8 months, trying to infiltrate this network. But what we discovered is worse than identity theft." My training kicked in despite the chaos. "Ma'am, I need to see some identification and—" "There's no time," she interrupted, pulling out a federal badge. "Agent Jennifer Walsh, Financial Crimes Division. This operation spans 12 states and involves over 40 law enforcement personnel selling personal data from their departments." Outside, I could hear Martinez shouting orders to the backup units that had arrived. But Jennifer grabbed my arm with genuine panic in her eyes. "Deputy, you can't trust anyone in your department with this information. The spreadsheet you just saw? Your partner Martinez is listed as a source. He's been feeding them DMV records for 2 years. The words hit me like ice water. Martinez, who I trusted with my life dozens of times, was selling citizen information to identity thieves. I thought about all the domestic calls we'd responded to together, all the traffic stops where he'd run license plates, all the times he'd had access to personal information. "Agent Walsh, I need to verify. Check the federal database when you get back to the station. Case file FB 2024-7892. But right now, we have a bigger problem. The man who escaped out the back door? His name is David Chen, and he's not just running this local operation. He's the liaison between the identity theft network and something much worse." Before I could ask what she meant, my radio crackled with Martinez's voice. "Suspect in custody. One David Chen, multiple warrants. But deputy, we have a problem. This guy says he wants to make a deal. Claims he has information about cop killings." Jennifer's face went white. "That's what I was afraid of. Deputy, these people don't just steal identities to commit financial fraud. They create new identities for people who need to disappear. People running from murder charges, people who've killed law enforcement officers." The implications were staggering. How many criminals had vanished using identities created from information stolen by corrupt cops? How many dangerous people were living in suburban neighborhoods under stolen names? "Agent Walsh, what exactly are you telling me?" "I'm telling you that 3 police officers have been killed in the past 18 months by people using identities created by this network. Officers who pulled over cars registered to stolen identities. Officers who responded to domestic calls at addresses tied to murdered people's social security numbers." My radio crackled again. "All units, we have a situation. David Chin is requesting immediate federal protection. Claims he has information about the murder of Officer Patricia Williams in Jackson County last month. I knew that case. Officer Williams had been shot during a routine traffic stop. The shooter was never identified, never caught. According to the report, the car was registered to someone who'd been dead for 3 years. Jennifer, are you telling me that Officer Williams was killed because she pulled over someone using a stolen identity created from information my department provided? That's exactly what I'm telling you. And David Chin just admitted he knows who killed her. The rain was still pounding the roof as backup officers secured the scene, but I could barely hear it over the sound of my own heart beating. Everything I thought I knew about my job, my colleagues, my safety was crumbling around me. Agent Walsh was gathering evidence when Martinez approached us. Partner, this is bigger than we thought. The FBI agent here says this connects to officer murders across multiple states. I looked at Martinez, my partner for 3 years, someone I'd shared meals with, someone whose kids I knew by name, and realized I was looking at a stranger. Someone who'd been selling information that got cops killed. Martinez? I said carefully. Agent Walsh briefed me on the federal investigation. Sounds like this network has been operating for years. Yeah, crazy stuff. Good thing we caught them, right? His smile looked exactly the same as always, but now it felt like ice. The federal evidence team arrived within an hour and took over the scene. Agent Walsh arranged for me to be debriefed at the federal building the next morning, away from my department. As we left the house, she pulled me aside one final time. Deputy, David Chin agreed to cooperate fully in exchange for federal protection. What he's telling us about the scope of this network, it's going to change everything. But I need you to be careful. We don't know how many people in your department are involved. That night, I sat in my kitchen staring at my service weapon and thinking about every traffic stop, every domestic call, every time I'd relied on my partner to watch my back. How many other deputies were involved? How many criminals were walking free with identities stolen from our own databases? The federal investigation that followed revealed the full scope of the network. 43 law enforcement personnel across 12 states, over 2,000 stolen identities, and direct connections to 6 officer murders. Martinez was arrested 2 weeks later, along with our desk sergeant and a records clerk. But here's what still haunts me. David Chen's cooperation revealed that this wasn't just about identity theft. The network was providing new identities to people fleeing serious charges, including individuals who'd committed violent crimes against law enforcement. Every time we ran a license plate or background check, we were potentially giving criminals the information they needed to create their next identity. I thought that was the worst discovery of my career. Then 3 days later, I got a call from Agent Walsh about a case in the next county that would show me how much deeper this corruption actually went. Have you ever wondered how much personal information law enforcement has access to about you? When you get pulled over for a traffic ticket or call police for help, do you think about where that information goes afterward? What's the most unprofessional or disturbing thing you've witnessed in a workplace you trusted? Let me know in the comments below, because what I learn next will make you question everyone you think you can trust. The call from Agent Walsh came 3 days after the identity theft bust, and what she told me about evidence tampering in my own department made me realize the corruption ran deeper than anyone imagined. Deputy, I need you to meet me at the federal building. We've been analyzing the financial records from the Chin operation, and there's something you need to see. It involves evidence from your department's storage facility. I'd been having trouble sleeping since discovering Martinez was selling citizen information to criminals. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that spreadsheet with names of cops who'd betrayed their oath. But what Agent Walsh showed me that morning made the identity theft look like petty crime. These are bank records showing payments to your evidence clerk, Robert Hendricks, going back 14 months, she said, spreading documents across the conference table. Small amounts, $500 to $1,000, always deposited the day after major drug busts or weapons seizures. I knew Hendricks. 20-year veteran, handled evidence intake and storage, seemed like the most trustworthy guy in the department. Agent Walsh, are you saying he's been stealing from evidence? Worse. We think he's been replacing evidence with fake items and selling the real drugs and weapons back to criminal networks. But here's what's really disturbing: the timing of these payments corresponds with cases where charges were dropped due to evidence problems. She pulled out another file. Look at this case from 8 months ago. Your department seized 40 pounds of fentanyl from a trafficking operation. 3 weeks later, the defense attorney claimed the evidence had been contaminated and the case was thrown out. But according to these bank records, Hendricks received a $15,000 payment 2 days after that hearing. The implications were staggering. Evidence clerk tampering with drug cases meant dangerous dealers walking free, but it also meant the fentanyl was back on the streets. People were dying from overdoses while our evidence clerk profited from returning the poison to circulation. Agent Walsh, how do we prove this without alerting him? That's where you come in. Your department just seized a large amount of methamphetamine from that truck stop bust last week, right? We need you to help us catch Hendricks in the act of replacing evidence. 2 days later, I found myself working with the FBI to set up surveillance on our own evidence storage facility. The plan was simple. I would request to review evidence from an old case, giving me legitimate access to the storage area where I could observe Hendricks without suspicion. But what I discovered in that evidence room was far worse than anyone expected. Sheriff Martinez and Sheriff Rodriguez had been assigned to work the weekend shift at the evidence facility, standard rotation for maintaining security. Martinez was new to our department, transferred from Jackson County after what she said was a promotion. Rodriguez was a 15-year veteran with an exemplary record. They worked with their K-9 partner, a German shepherd named Max who was trained in drug detection. I arrived at the facility Saturday morning under the pretense of reviewing evidence for court testimony on Monday. The building was quiet except for the sound of rain on the metal roof and the occasional sound of Max walking around the storage area. "Morning," Martinez called out when I entered. "You're here early for a Saturday." "Court prep," I explained, showing her my authorization paperwork. "Need to review some evidence from the Patterson drug case." She nodded and buzzed me into the main storage area. Rodriguez was cataloging recent intakes while Max lay near the evidence lockers, but something about the dog's behavior seemed off. He kept whining and pacing near one particular section of lockers, acting agitated in a way that didn't match his usual calm demeanor. "Max okay?" I asked Rodriguez. "Been acting strange all morning. Started about an hour ago when we moved some evidence around. Think he might be picking up scent traces from the drug evidence." But as I watched Max more carefully, I realized he wasn't just detecting drugs, he was trained to alert to specific substances, and his behavior suggested he was finding something unexpected. K-9 dogs are trained to have different alerts for different drugs, and Max was giving an alert I'd never seen before. I found the Patterson case evidence and started my review, but I kept watching Max and the two sheriffs. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Every time Max alerted to a locker, Martinez would make a note on her inventory sheet, but Rodriguez would immediately distract the dog and move him away from that area. After an hour of observation, I realized what was happening. Max was trained to detect drugs, but he was finding lockers that should have contained seized narcotics but didn't. The dog was alerting to the absence of expected drug scents, not their presence. When Rodriguez stepped out to use the restroom, I approached Martinez. "How long has Max been acting like this?" "Started about 2 weeks ago," she said quietly. "Rodriguez thinks the dog is just getting old, losing his effectiveness. But between you and me, I think Max is detecting something wrong with our evidence storage." "What do you mean?" Martinez glanced around to make sure Rodriguez wasn't returning yet. "I transferred here from Jackson County because of problems with evidence tampering. 3 major drug cases got thrown out because evidence had been compromised. I started noticing similarities here." She pulled out her inventory sheet. "Look at these lockers Max has been alerting to. All of them should contain large drug seizures from the past 6 months. But when I've checked them, the packages look different. Wrong weight, different texture. I think someone's been replacing real drugs with fake substitutes." Before I could respond, Rodriguez returned with Robert Hendricks, the evidence clerk Agent Walsh suspected of tampering. "Found Hendricks in the parking lot," Rodriguez announced. "Says he needs to do some weekend inventory work." The tension in the room immediately escalated. Max started barking and pulling toward the lockers he'd been alerting to all morning. Hendricks looked nervous, constantly checking his watch and glancing at the exit. "Hendricks," I said carefully. "Agent Walsh from the FBI was asking about evidence procedures yesterday. Said they might want to do a random audit of our storage facility." His face went white. "FBI? What kind of audit?" "Drug evidence integrity check. Making sure everything's properly documented and secure." Rodriguez stepped closer to Hendricks. "That's funny. I don't remember any notification about federal audits. Usually the sheriff's office gets advance notice for those." That's when I realized Rodriguez wasn't part of the evidence tampering, he was investigating it. And Hendricks had just walked into a trap. Max was still barking and trying to get to the lockers. Martinez decided to trust her instincts, and opened one of the lockers the dog had been alerting to. Inside was a package labeled as containing 5 pounds of seized cocaine from a bust 2 months earlier. But when she cut open the package, white powder spilled out that looked nothing like cocaine. Max immediately stopped barking and sat down, his trained response for detecting a substance that wasn't what it was supposed to be. "This is baking soda," Martinez said, testing the powder. "Hendricks, where's the real cocaine from this seizure?" Hendricks bolted for the exit, but Rodriguez was ready for him. As they struggled, Hendricks screamed something that made my blood freeze. "You don't understand. They'll kill me if I don't deliver the real drugs by tonight." When backup arrived and Hendricks was secured, he immediately started talking about death threats and being forced to steal evidence. But what he revealed about the scope of the operation was terrifying. "It's not just our department," he said. "There's a network of evidence clerks across 5 counties. They threaten our families if we don't cooperate. My daughter, they showed me photos of her at school, knew her schedule, her friends' names." Rodriguez had been documenting irregularities for months, trying to build a case against evidence tampering without knowing who else might be involved. Martinez had transferred to our department specifically because she'd recognized the same patterns that destroyed cases in Jackson County. But the most disturbing revelation came when Agent Walsh arrived to take over the investigation. The evidence tampering wasn't just about reselling drugs, it was about ensuring specific criminal cases would fail in court. "The people running this network aren't just interested in the money from reselling evidence," Agent Walsh explained. "They're systematically destroying cases against specific individuals. High-level drug dealers, weapons traffickers, people with connections to organized crime." She showed us a list of cases that had been dismissed due to evidence problems across multiple departments. "These aren't random criminals. These are key players in criminal organizations who were supposed to be taken off the streets permanently." The federal investigation that followed revealed evidence tampering in 7 sheriff's departments across 3 states. Over 200 criminal cases had been compromised, including dozens involving violent crimes and organized drug trafficking. But here's what still haunts me. Hendricks wasn't the only evidence clerk being threatened. The criminal network had identified families of law enforcement personnel and was using intimidation to force cooperation. They knew where our children went to school, where our spouses worked, where we lived. Max, the German shepherd, had been trying to alert his handlers to evidence tampering for weeks, but only Martinez had recognized what his behavior meant. Rodriguez had been investigating alone, not knowing who he could trust in his own department. The case should have been closed when Hendricks was arrested and the evidence room secured. But what Agent Walsh discovered next revealed why this network was so desperate to control evidence storage facilities. What I didn't know was that the evidence tampering was connected to something much bigger, a systematic effort to protect criminals involved in the identity theft network we'd discovered 3 days earlier. The same people who'd been selling stolen identities were also ensuring that anyone caught using those identities would never face trial. How much do you trust the evidence in criminal cases? When you hear about cases being dismissed due to evidence problems, do you assume it's just procedural errors? Have you ever wondered if someone in law enforcement might be working for the other side? Let me know in the comments, because what we discovered next showed us that some criminals had been planning this infiltration for years. I've been a sheriff's detective for 11 years, and what happened on December 2nd, 2024 still keeps me awake at night. What I discovered that day changed everything I thought I knew about trust and betrayal in law enforcement. The revelation came during what should have been a routine briefing about the evidence tampering case. Agent Walsh had called a meeting with all department personnel who weren't under investigation, trying to determine how deep the corruption went. But when she started asking about information leaks, I realized we had a much bigger problem than evidence theft. "Detective, I need to ask you about Operation Silent Storm," Agent Walsh said, referring to a federal investigation into drug trafficking that our department had been supporting. 3 weeks ago, your department provided surveillance locations for federal agents monitoring suspected dealers. Within 12 hours, all 3 surveillance sites had been abandoned by the suspects. I remembered that operation. We'd spent weeks gathering intelligence on drug distribution networks, and I'd personally helped select observation points that would give federal agents clear sight lines to suspected dealing locations. The fact that all 3 sites were abandoned so quickly suggested someone had warned the criminals. "Agent Walsh, are you saying someone in our department leaked the surveillance plan?" "That's exactly what I'm saying. And it's not the first time. Over the past 8 months, 7 federal operations involving your department have been compromised. Someone is feeding information to criminal networks." She spread out a timeline on the conference table. Each compromised operation was marked with dates, and I could see a disturbing pattern. Every leak had occurred within 24 hours of our department receiving operational details from federal agents. "The person doing this has access to federal briefings, knows our surveillance techniques, and understands our communication protocols," Agent Walsh continued. "This isn't some low-level clerk or evidence room employee. This is someone with security clearance and access to sensitive information." That's when I realized the true scope of what we were dealing with. The identity theft network, the evidence tampering, the compromised operations, they were all connected. Someone in our department was coordinating with criminal organizations, providing them with real-time intelligence about law enforcement activities. But what made my blood run cold was the realization that this person had been in every briefing I'd attended, knew every case I was working on, and had access to information about my personal safety and the safety of other officers. "Agent Walsh, do you have any suspects?" She looked around the room at the 5 of us who hadn't been arrested or suspended. "Detective, I need you to understand something. The person we're looking for isn't just selling information for money. Based on the timing and specificity of these leaks, they're actively working to protect specific criminal organizations. This is coordinated, long-term infiltration." Over the next 2 days, I found myself in the surreal position of investigating my own colleagues while trying to maintain normal operations. Agent Walsh had given me a list of information to track who had access to certain briefings, who knew about specific operations, who might have connections to the arrested suspects. But the breakthrough came when I was reviewing old case files and noticed something that made my stomach drop. Every compromised federal operation had one thing in common. They all involved criminal networks that used stolen identities created by the Chin operation we busted 2 weeks earlier. The mole wasn't just leaking random information. They were specifically protecting criminals who relied on identity theft to avoid prosecution. The evidence tampering, the leaked surveillance plans, the compromised operations, it was all designed to protect a specific criminal network that depended on stolen identities and corrupted evidence to stay in business. I brought this connection to Agent Walsh, and she immediately recognized the significance. "Detective, this means our mole has been working with this criminal network for months, possibly years. They've been systematically undermining law enforcement efforts to protect an organized crime operation." But then she said something that made me realize how personal this had become. "There's something else you need to know. 3 of the compromised operations involved attempts to arrest individuals using identities stolen from law enforcement families. Your mole has been protecting criminals who specifically target cops and their families. The investigation took a dramatic turn when Agent Walsh decided to set a trap. She created a fake federal operation targeting a drug distribution network, but she only shared the operational details with one person in our department, Deputy Chief Sarah Morrison. Morrison had been with the department for 18 years, had commendations for bravery, and was being considered for promotion to sheriff. She was also someone I'd worked with closely on dozens of cases, someone I'd trusted with sensitive information about my own investigations. Within 6 hours of Morrison receiving the fake operational details, federal surveillance teams observed suspicious activity at the target location. Known drug dealers were rapidly moving equipment and abandoning their distribution points, exactly as if they'd been warned about impending law enforcement action. But Agent Walsh had prepared for this. The fake operation included surveillance of Morrison herself, and federal agents watched as she made phone calls to numbers that traced back to prepaid phones associated with the criminal network. The arrest happened the next morning during shift briefing. As Morrison was discussing the day's patrol assignments, federal agents entered our conference room and placed her under arrest for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and violation of federal communications laws. The room fell silent except for the sound of rain against the windows. Morrison, who I'd worked with for 6 years, who had been at my promotion ceremony, who knew my children's names and had attended my father's funeral, was being handcuffed for betraying everything we'd sworn to protect. But what she said as they led her away made everything even worse. "You have no idea how deep this goes. You think you caught the network? You caught one small piece. There are people in positions you can't imagine, and they know about every move you're planning." The federal investigation that followed Morrison's arrest revealed the true scope of the infiltration. She had been recruited 8 years earlier, not through greed or blackmail, but through a systematic process that identified law enforcement officers with financial problems, family issues, or career frustrations. The criminal network had been playing the long game, identifying vulnerable officers and gradually drawing them into corruption through small favors, financial assistance, and personal relationships. By the time the officers realized they were compromised, they were too deep to escape. Morrison had been providing information that led to the deaths of confidential informants, the failure of drug interdiction operations, and the escape of violent criminals. But the most disturbing revelation was that she wasn't alone. Agent Walsh showed me a communication network that connected Morrison to similar moles in police departments across 4 states. This wasn't just local corruption, it was a coordinated effort to infiltrate law enforcement agencies throughout the region. "Detective, Morrison was reporting to someone who coordinates law enforcement infiltration for organized crime. Someone who knows how police departments operate, how federal agencies work, and how to identify vulnerable officers for recruitment." The investigation eventually revealed that Morrison had been responsible for leaking information that led to the murder of Officer Patricia Williams, whose death had started this entire investigation. Williams had been killed because Morrison had provided the criminal network with her patrol route and schedule information. But here's what still haunts me. Morrison wasn't working alone in our department. The federal investigation identified a second mole who had been feeding information to the network for even longer. Someone who was still active, still trusted, still had access to ongoing investigations. Agent Walsh's final briefing was held at a secure federal facility, not our department building. "Detective, we've neutralized the immediate threat, but the network Morrison was part of is still active. They know we've identified her, and they're likely already working to recruit new sources within law enforcement." She paused and looked directly at me. "There's something else. The communication intercepts from Morrison's arrest suggest that this network has been planning something major. Something that requires real-time law enforcement intelligence and the ability to compromise multiple ongoing investigations simultaneously. The case should have been closed with Morrison's arrest and the dismantling of the evidence tampering operation. But what Agent Walsh discovered next revealed why this criminal network had been so desperate to infiltrate law enforcement agencies at such a deep level. That incident report was buried in federal files, but what happened next revealed why they'd been planning this infiltration for years. The network wasn't just trying to avoid arrest, they were preparing for something that would require them to stay ahead of every law enforcement agency in the region. How well do you really know your coworkers? When someone has security clearance and access to sensitive information, do you ever wonder what they might be doing with it? Have you ever worked with someone who seemed to know things they shouldn't, or who always seemed one step ahead of internal investigations? Let me know in the comments, because what we discovered about their ultimate plan will make you question whether any workplace can ever be truly secure. The emergency call from Agent Walsh came at 3:17 a.m. on December 15, 2024, and what she told me about Operation Thunderstrike made me realize we were about to face the deadliest betrayal in law enforcement history. Detective, we have a situation. Federal intelligence indicates that the criminal network Morrison was working for is planning to sabotage a major federal operation scheduled for tomorrow morning. We're talking about the largest coordinated drug and human trafficking bust in regional history, and someone in your department is planning to ensure it fails catastrophically. I was still processing the implications when she continued with information that made my blood freeze. The sabotage isn't just about letting criminals escape. Intelligence suggests they're planning to turn this into an ambush situation where federal agents and local officers will be put in immediate danger. Operation Thunderstrike was supposed to be the culmination of an 18-month federal investigation into organized crime networks across 5 states. Over 200 law enforcement personnel from multiple agencies were coordinating simultaneous raids on trafficking operations, drug distribution centers, and money laundering facilities. Our department's role was providing local support for 3 raid locations within our jurisdiction. We were responsible for perimeter security, traffic control, and backup support for federal tactical teams. Standard procedure for major operations, and something we'd done dozens of times without incident. But Agent Walsh's intelligence briefing revealed why this operation was different. The criminal network has been preparing for this exact scenario for over 2 years. The infiltration of law enforcement wasn't just about stealing information or protecting individual criminals. They'd been positioning themselves to sabotage the largest federal operation in decades. She pulled out classified documents that showed the true scope of what we were facing. The network had moles in 7 different law enforcement agencies participating in Operation Thunderstrike. They knew the exact timing, locations, and tactical plans for every raid. Detective, they're not planning to just warn their people and evacuate. They're planning to turn these raid locations into kill zones for law enforcement personnel. The briefing took place in a secure federal facility, not our department building, because Agent Walsh couldn't risk the information leaking to whoever our second mole was. Based on communication intercepts from Morrison's arrest, they knew the sabotage would come from someone with access to tactical planning and real-time operational communications. The person we're looking for has been in every planning meeting for Thunderstrike, Agent Walsh explained. They know which entrances tactical teams will use, which communication frequencies will be monitoring, and exactly when each phase of the operation will begin. As she spoke, I realized the horrifying truth. Someone I'd been working alongside for weeks of planning was preparing to get federal agents killed. Someone who'd sat in briefings discussing officer safety protocols was planning to eliminate those protections. Agent Walsh had prepared a trap similar to the one that caught Morrison, but this time the stakes were life and death. We're going to feed false tactical information to each remaining suspect individually. Whoever acts on that information to warn the criminal network will reveal themselves, but we'll only have hours to prevent the sabotage. The suspects were narrowed down to 3 people with the necessary access: Sergeant Williams, who handled tactical communications, Lieutenant Rodriguez, who coordinated with federal teams, and Detective Phillips, who managed intelligence sharing between agencies. Each was given slightly different versions of the operational timeline. Williams was told the raids would begin at 6 a.m. instead of 5 a.m. Rodriguez was told that Team Alpha would enter through the south entrance instead of the north. Phillips was told that the primary target had been changed from Location 2 to Location 3. Within 4 hours, federal surveillance detected suspicious activity at Location 3, the false target Phillips had been told about. criminal networks were rapidly evacuating equipment and personnel from that location, proving Phillips was our mole. But when federal agents moved to arrest Phillips, they discovered something that made the situation exponentially more dangerous. He wasn't just planning to warn criminals about the raids. He was coordinating a counter-operation designed to ambush law enforcement personnel during the raids. The arrest happened at Phillips' home at 2 a.m., 6 hours before Operation Thunderstrike was scheduled to begin. When federal agents searched his residence, they found tactical equipment, detailed maps of all raid locations, and communication devices that connected him directly to the criminal network's command structure. But the most terrifying discovery was a detailed plan for what they called Officer Down Protocol, a coordinated attack on law enforcement personnel during the federal raids. The plan included sniper positions overlooking raid locations, explosive devices planted at tactical entry points, and armed civilians positioned to attack officers from behind. Phillips had been feeding the criminal network information not just to help them escape, but to help them kill as many law enforcement officers as possible during the raids. This wasn't just sabotage, it was a planned massacre. Agent Walsh immediately contacted all agencies participating in Operation Thunderstrike. "We have confirmation of planned ambushes at all 3 primary raid locations. Armed civilians with sniper rifles have been positioned overnight. Explosive devices may have been planted at tactical entry points." The decision was made to proceed with modified operations using different locations, different timing, and different tactical approaches. But Phillips' arrest had triggered emergency protocols within the criminal network, and they began implementing backup plans that federal intelligence hadn't anticipated. At 4:47 a.m., I was part of a joint federal-local team conducting surveillance on Location 2 when we observed armed individuals taking positions in buildings overlooking the planned raid site. These weren't just lookouts, they were setting up to kill law enforcement officers during what should have been a routine tactical operation. The radio chatter was unlike anything I'd experienced in 11 years of law enforcement. Multiple agencies coordinating to avoid planned ambushes while trying to execute arrests of major criminal targets. Federal tactical teams were being repositioned in real time as we discovered new threats at each location. "All units, we have confirmed sniper positions at Location 1. Federal teams are aborting south entrance and moving to alternate entry point. Location 3 shows signs of explosive devices near primary breach point. Bomb squad en route, tactical teams holding position. Location 2 has armed civilians in overwatch positions. Count shows at least 6 individuals with rifles positioned for ambush." But the most chilling moment came when Phillips, now in federal custody, revealed the true scope of what the criminal network had been planning. "You think this is just about these raids? This network has been preparing for a war against law enforcement. They have people in departments across multiple states, and today was supposed to be the beginning of coordinated attacks on officers nationwide." Federal intelligence confirmed that similar sabotage plans were being implemented in other states where the criminal network had infiltrated law enforcement agencies. Operation Thunderstrike wasn't just being sabotaged locally, it was part of a coordinated effort to attack law enforcement personnel across the entire region. The raids ultimately proceeded with modified tactics and additional security, but the psychological impact was devastating. Every law enforcement officer participating knew that someone they trusted with their lives had been planning to kill them. The bonds of trust that hold law enforcement agencies together had been systematically undermined by criminal infiltration. Operation Thunderstrike resulted in over 150 arrests across 5 states, the seizure of millions of dollars in drugs and weapons, and the disruption of major trafficking networks. But the victory came at a terrible cost: the discovery that organized crime had successfully infiltrated law enforcement to a degree that threatened the safety of every officer in the region. Phillips' cooperation with federal investigators revealed the full structure of the criminal network's law enforcement infiltration program. Over the course of 5 years, they had identified and recruited moles in 12 different agencies, created false identities for hundreds of criminals, corrupted evidence in major cases, and planned coordinated attacks on law enforcement personnel. But the most disturbing revelation came during Phillips' final debriefing. "This isn't over," The people who recruited me, who trained me, who planned these attacks, they're still out there. And they know that you know about the infiltration now. They're already adapting, already recruiting new sources, already planning their next operation. The federal investigation that followed Operation Thunderstrike led to arrests of criminal network leaders across multiple states. But it also revealed that the threat to law enforcement integrity is ongoing. Criminal organizations have recognized that infiltrating police departments is more effective than fighting them directly. 6 months later, I transferred to a federal task force specifically created to identify and prevent criminal infiltration of law enforcement agencies. But every day, I wonder about the officers I work with, the information I share, and whether the person sitting next to me in briefings might be planning my death. The rain still sounds different now when I hear it during night shifts. Not peaceful, but ominous. Like it's trying to wash away secrets that run deeper than anyone wants to acknowledge. And somewhere out there, criminal networks are still working to turn the people we trust most into the people we should fear most. The badge I wear represents everything I believe in about justice and protection. But Phillips wore the same badge, took the same oath, and used that trust to plan the murder of federal agents and local officers. The question that haunts every law enforcement officer now is simple and terrifying. How do you protect and serve when you can't trust the person standing beside you? Have you ever wondered if someone you work with closely might be working against everything your organization stands for? When you hear about law enforcement corruption, do you think about how deep that corruption might really go? What would you do if you discovered that someone you trusted with your safety was actually planning to harm you? Let me know in the comments, because the threat of infiltration isn't limited to law enforcement, it's a reality that any organization needs to understand and prepare for. Thanks so much for watching. I can't express enough how much your support means. The likes, the comments, it all really helps the channel grow. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I always take the time to read them. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on any new videos. See you next time.